Have you ever wondered why we root for the villain, even when we know what they do is wrong? It is a question that unravels the darkest corners of human nature, one that slips quietly into our subconscious each time we watch a movie, read a book, or witness a true crime unfold on the news. In a world obsessed with heroes, why do villains captivate us more? We are drawn to them, not just because of their actions, but because of what they reveal about us. Here is a paradox to consider. If evil is the opposite of good, why does it feel familiar? Think about it. When you watch the Joker walk down a chaotic street, laughing through destruction, you do not just see insanity, you see pain, you see rebellion, you see parts of yourself you do not want to talk about. You see the anger you buried, the resentment you swallowed, the moments you were overlooked, dismissed, broken and never healed. Villains speak the language of wounds. That is what makes them real. But this is not just about comic books or criminal minds. Dark psychology is not fiction, it is a mirror. Villains show us that what drives evil is not some external demon. It is the mind. It is fear, loss, control, trauma, the very building blocks of human behavior. Some villains start as victims, some are products of power, some were never broken, they simply chose to break others. And the most terrifying part, you might relate to their choices more than you admit. From the cold logic of Machiavelli to the twisted brilliance of real-life manipulators, the psychology of villains exposes the uncomfortable truth. Evil is not distant, it is human, it is strategic, it is seductive. The real question is not why they do what they do, but what in you understands why they do it. That is what this video is about. We are going to explore the anatomy of darkness, from trauma to manipulation, from the shadow self to moral disengagement, and uncover what really drives the worst in us. We will go into mental health, true crime, narcissism, personality disorders, and the philosophical roots of evil. We will not only talk about famous villains, we will confront the villain that sometimes whispers inside our own minds. So, take a deep breath. This is not going to be easy, but it is going to be honest. Now, before we dive in, tell me in the comments, who are the top 3 most disturbing, manipulative, or unforgettable villains you have ever known in both fiction or real life? Let us see whose darkness speaks the loudest. So where does it begin? If you are going to understand the psychology of villains, you must first ask, is evil born or is it built? The birth of a villain is never simple. It is shaped by a collision of biology, experience, and choice. From the outside, dark psychology might look like a storm of manipulation or cruelty, but inside, it is often a slow erosion of trust, of connection, of empathy. There are villains who were never nurtured, never loved, never safe. There are those whose minds were forged in violent households, abandoned bedrooms, or cold institutions. Their worldview was formed not by joy, but by survival. In that space, morality becomes elastic. Right and wrong blur beneath the weight of pain. Research in developmental psychology has shown that childhood trauma, physical abuse, neglect, emotional deprivation changes the brain. In studies of antisocial personality disorder, including some traits of psychopathy, early signs often appear in broken family systems. These individuals do not just choose darkness, sometimes they were raised in it. But here lies the uncomfortable truth. Not all who suffer become evil, and not all who do evil were ever hurt. That brings us to the paradox. If pain makes people dangerous, why do some who suffer become healers while others become monsters? Science alone cannot explain that, but philosophy can help frame it. The existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre once suggested that man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. That means choice, free will, is always at play, and choice, unlike trauma, is owned. Villains, then, are not just victims of circumstance, they are creators of consequence. They are architects of pain, not just survivors of it. But what if the wiring is faulty from the start? Here we meet the argument for nature, for biology. Studies of brain scans reveal that some individuals, particularly those scoring high in callous, unemotional traits, show reduced activity in the amygdala, the brain's center for fear and empathy. Some researchers argue that this lack of emotional resonance is not caused by trauma, but is intrinsic. That is, some people are born with less capacity for remorse. But even that is not fate. The psychologist James Fallon, who discovered his own brain, matched that of a psychopath, never committed violent acts. Why? Because he had love, he had structure, he had choice. So we are left between two truths, both equally haunting. 1. The mind of a villain can be shaped by suffering so severe that darkness feels like the only way out. 2. The mind of a villain can arise from a place of cold calculation, where harm is inflicted not from desperation, but from design. If you have ever looked into someone's eyes and felt that chill, the feeling that they were not angry, not broken, just empty, then you have glimpsed what dark psychology calls the void. And in that void, the seeds of evil can take root without reason. So what drives evil? Is it the child crying behind closed doors, or the mind that never learned to cry at all? That question will follow us, because villains, in the end, are not just characters in a script. They are reflections of what happens when human nature meets its most fragile and frightening limits. It is one thing to fear evil that looks like evil, but the true terror begins when it smiles back at you. In the world of dark psychology, the most disturbing villains are not the ones who rant and rage. They are the ones who blend in, calm, composed, socially skilled. On the surface, they appear functional, even charming. Beneath it all, something else stirs. This is what psychologists call the hidden self. The idea traces back to Carl Jung's concept of the shadow, the parts of our psyche that we repress or deny, the selfishness we disown, the aggression we bury, the envy we never speak aloud. For most people, the shadow remains hidden but contained. For villains, it takes the wheel. Jungian psychology tells us that when we fail to confront our shadow, it begins to control us from within. It becomes a ghost that wears our face but acts in ways we cannot explain. This is not just theory. It is seen in every profile of quiet manipulators, in the lives of fraudsters, cult leaders, even high-functioning criminals. You have seen it before. The colleague who lies without flinching, the neighbor who smiles too wide, the person who seems to enjoy your discomfort, even as they say all the right things. They wear the mask well. Nowhere is this mask more dangerous than in the contrast between psychopaths and sociopaths. A sociopath is impulsive, prone to emotional outbursts, shaped heavily by environment. They may feel guilt, but only in flickers. A psychopath, on the other hand, is cold. They calculate. They lack remorse entirely. Their emotions, if any, are shallow and strategic. They do not explode, they orchestrate. But here is the disturbing part. Both may appear completely normal. This is why dark psychology matters. It reveals that villains do not always look like villains. They look like us. And if the mask is convincing enough, we may not know the danger until it is far too late. So ask yourself, if someone can mimic empathy perfectly, how would you know they are empty inside? That question lingers in psychology and philosophy alike. The philosopher Hannah Arendt called it the banality of evil. In her study of Nazi official Adolf Eichmann, she did not find a monster. She found a bureaucrat, a man who followed orders, a man who smiled, who had dinner with his family, who helped orchestrate horror without flinching. Evil, it turns out, does not need to be dramatic. It can be casual. It can be clean. The danger is not just in the villains who act. It is in those who hide, those who manipulate without raising suspicion, those who know how to play the part while rewriting the script behind the scenes. Think about the mind games people play in everyday life: gaslighting, guilt-tripping, silent treatments. These may seem small, but they stem from the same dark psychology, the desire to control another person's mind without ever raising a hand. What drives evil in these moments is not rage. It is power. It is the thrill of knowing you can influence someone without them even realizing it. And if that is not terrifying, what is? Because here is the paradox. If someone knows how to seem good, even while doing harm, how can you ever truly know who someone is? In the world of villains, appearances are never safe. Trust becomes a gamble, and even your own reflection might hold secrets you are not ready to face. If masks hide the darkness, then power reveals it. What drives evil is not always rooted in pain or secrecy. Sometimes it is ambition. Sometimes it is ego. swelling quietly inside the mind until it demands not only control but worship. The psychology of villains is incomplete without understanding power, not just as influence but as identity. In many of the most chilling case studies from history, fiction, and modern psychology, power does not corrupt, it exposes. It unmasks the hunger that was always there. This is where we enter the territory of the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. These three traits, often studied together in personality psychology, form a disturbing triangle of dominance. Narcissists crave admiration and superiority. Machiavellians seek manipulation and strategy. Psychopaths lack empathy and conscience. Together, they paint the profile of a mind that sees people as pieces, to be moved, used, discarded. But what happens when that mind gains power? Look to political tyrants, cult leaders, corporate predators, or even, closer to home, toxic partners and abusive managers. These are not strangers from another planet. These are human beings who found a way to bend others to their will and liked it. The philosopher Niccolò Machiavelli once wrote, "It is much safer to be feared than loved, if one must choose." That line has been quoted by villains for centuries, not because it is cruel, but because it works. Power, in the wrong hands, becomes a mirror. It reflects not the public image, but the private intent. But here is the deeper question. If having control feels good, when does it become evil? Psychological research shows that power can literally change the brain. Studies from UC Berkeley demonstrated that individuals in high-power positions show less activation in the mirror neuron system, the part of the brain that helps us empathize. In simple terms, power can reduce your ability to care about others. Now imagine that kind of power in the hands of someone already inclined toward manipulation, someone whose self-worth depends on dominance, someone whose ego cannot tolerate weakness, not in themselves and not in you. That is the villain's edge, not just strength, but the belief that others are beneath them. And when ego becomes a moral compass, cruelty becomes justified. Every betrayal, every scheme, every calculated lie becomes a move in the game. They are not hurting people, they are winning. That is why many villains do not see themselves as villains at all. They see themselves as visionaries, as kings, as gods. Which brings us to the paradox that should make you pause. If someone believes they are doing what is necessary, is there any limit to what they will justify? Power has a way of blurring the line between conviction and delusion. In the mind of the villain, control is not just a tool, it is proof of worth. If you can be manipulated, you deserve it. If you can be conquered, you are weak. And if you resist, then you are a threat, and threats must be removed. This is not just the stuff of horror films or historical dictatorships. You can see this psychology play out in daily life, in abusive relationships, in corrupt leadership, in narcissists who cannot handle rejection and retaliate with silence, gaslighting, or public humiliation. These are not isolated incidents, they are patterns, and dark psychology studies them because they reveal one thing: evil minds often feel most alive when they are in control. So ask yourself again, when does leadership become tyranny? When does confidence become a weapon? And would you know it before it is too late? What makes someone harm others without flinching? And perhaps more unnervingly, how do they sleep at night? Once a villain gains power, the next step in dark psychology is preservation, not just of control, but of the self. You cannot live long in darkness unless you find a way to turn the lights off in your own mind. This is where moral disengagement begins. Psychologist Albert Bandura, one of the most respected minds in behavioral science, proposed that people are not naturally wired to harm others. To do so, they must first disengage from their internal moral standards. They must rewrite the script of what is right and wrong, so that wrong becomes necessary, even heroic. And it happens more often than you think. The concept of moral disengagement explains why ordinary people commit atrocities during war, why white-collar criminals rationalize devastating fraud, why abusers blame their victims. It is not about lack of knowledge. It is about self-preservation of the ego at any cost. To inflict pain, a person must first kill the voice inside that says, "This is wrong." They do it by changing the language. It's not abuse, it's discipline. It's not a lie, it's a strategy. It's not murder, it's justice. And no fictional character captures this descent more famously than the Joker. In the world of DC Comics, Joker is chaos incarnate, unpredictable, violent, brilliant. But what makes him terrifying is not just the acts of terror, it is the conviction behind them. In The Dark Knight, he says with calm sincerity, "I'm not a monster, I'm just ahead of the curve." In that moment, we see moral disengagement in full bloom. He does not view himself as evil. He believes he is enlightened, simply unbound by society's fake civility. He is not acting without reason. He is acting from a twisted philosophy of clarity, where morality is nothing but a joke, and he is the only one laughing. Now think more personally. Have you ever hurt someone and then justified it by blaming their behavior, said something cruel, then convinced yourself it was honesty, ignored someone's suffering because you believed they deserved it? These are small forms of moral disengagement, and they exist in all of us. That is the paradox. If everyone justifies their actions in their own mind, who decides what is truly evil? Villains, at their core, are masters of this mental sleight of hand. They do not just justify their choices, they project the blame. The fault lies with the system, the weak, the disloyal. They are not wrong, the world is. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned us with piercing clarity, beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster, but in moral disengagement, that warning fades. The monster does not see a monster in the mirror, he sees a misunderstood savior. This is where psychological projection enters, the dark habit of assigning your own flaws to others. The villain does not see their ego, their cruelty, their manipulation. Instead, they call others arrogant, abusive, untrustworthy. It becomes a shield of delusion. And like all shields, it breaks under pressure. Some villains double down, others fracture, the rare few regret. But the majority, they keep moving forward, justifying each step with a louder story, a cleaner label, a sharper lie. So ask yourself, if someone truly believes they are doing good, even while committing harm, is their evil more dangerous or more tragic? This is the genius and the horror of dark psychology. Villains are not just liars to the world, they are liars to themselves, and those lies once believed become the fuel that keeps their darkness alive. There is something even more unsettling than what villains do. It is what the rest of us allow them to do. Dark psychology is not just about the minds that create chaos. It is about the systems that protect them, the crowds that cheer them, the followers who carry out their orders without blinking. Sometimes evil thrives not because of the villain's power, but because of our silence. So, what drives evil forward once it begins? It is not always the will of one, but the obedience of many. Consider the infamous Milgram experiment from the 1960s. Psychologist Stanley Milgram wanted to test how far people would go when instructed by authority. Participants were told to deliver electric shocks to another person for every wrong answer, increasing the voltage each time. Though the shocks were fake, the emotional pressure was real. The result, a majority of people obeyed, even when they thought they were causing unbearable pain. What does that say about us? It says that under the right conditions, stress, hierarchy, social pressure, ordinary people will support cruelty. They will do it with a clean conscience, simply because someone told them to. That is the terrifying simplicity of obedience. Now look at history. From genocides to cults, from totalitarian regimes to financial scandals, villains rarely act alone. They operate with help, sometimes blind, sometimes willing. In the infamous Nuremberg trials, countless individuals justified their roles in atrocities with 5 words: "I was just following orders." That brings us back to the concept Hannah Arendt introduced, the banality of evil. She described how ordinary-looking people, like Adolf Eichmann, committed unspeakable crimes, not with rage or ideology, but with bureaucratic efficiency, the paperwork of murder, the logistics of genocide. It was evil not as madness, but as monotony. And that is what makes it so dangerous. You may think you would never follow a villain, but the psychology of villains reveals something more personal. You do not have to agree with evil to allow it. Sometimes all you have to do is look away. So here is the paradox. If doing nothing helps evil grow, does silence make you guilty? Think about the villains in your own life, not just in fiction, but in workplaces, families, politics. The boss who bullies employees, the influencer who deceives followers, the friend who manipulates with guilt. How often have you watched, without acting? We justify it. It's not my place. I don't want drama. They probably deserve it. These are the same justifications used across every level of human behavior, from the personal to the historical. Villains are not always powerful because they are strong. Often they are powerful because others give up their own strength. Psychological manipulation is rarely done alone. It needs an echo, a support beam, a crowd. And here is where the cycle continues. The more followers a villain gathers, the more their delusion is confirmed. I must be right, they think. Look how many believe me. Look how many obey. This is not just groupthink. It is validation, and it is intoxicating. So now ask yourself, if you were part of the crowd, would you know? Would you stop? Or would you clap? That question is not meant to accuse. It is meant to awaken. Because in every system of evil, the villain may start the fire, but the people around them carry the matches. You might not say it out loud, but part of you admires the villain. And that is not a mistake. It is a mirror. In the depths of dark psychology, perhaps the most controversial truth is this: we do not just fear villains. We are drawn to them. We study them, quote them, wear their faces on t-shirts. We analyze their minds with more passion than we do heroes. Why? Because villains do what we cannot. They say what we silence. They live without the masks we wear every day. It is not the evil we admire, it is the freedom. Take Joker again, the unpredictable force of chaos. What is it that makes audiences lean in every time he appears? It is not his destruction, it is his clarity. In The Dark Knight, he says, "You see, their morals, their code, it's a bad joke, dropped at the first sign of trouble." He is not just attacking the system, he is exposing its fragility, and by doing so, he exposes ours. What drives evil in his world is not chaos for its own sake, it is revelation. The Joker shows us that beneath our polite smiles and fragile rules, we are all a little unhinged, and it only takes one bad day. And that idea shakes us, because deep down we suspect it might be true. So here is the paradox. If villains break rules we wish we could, do we hate them or envy them? That is the uncomfortable psychology of villains. We see in them what we repress in ourselves. The anger, the defiance, the need to be seen, the hunger for justice, even if twisted. This is called psychological projection. We project onto villains the emotions we do not want to admit we feel, and in doing so we connect. It is not sympathy, it is resonance. We recognize the villain's origin story because it starts like ours. I was ignored. I was hurt. No one listened. That is the seed of every redemption arc and every collapse into darkness. What separates the hero from the villain is not always a greater cause. It is usually just a different response to pain. The shadow self, as Carl Jung described it, is the part of us we pretend does not exist. Our envy, our rage, our selfishness. But when we watch a villain act without apology, that shadow feels seen, and that is powerful. Even philosophers admit this dilemma. The ancient Greeks wrote tragedies, not just to punish villains, but to understand them. Characters like Medea or Oedipus were not pure evil. They were human behavior in extremity, choices that made sense, but went too far. Today's media continues that legacy. Modern storytelling paints villains in complex colors, broken, brilliant, betrayed. They are not born wicked, they are made to be understood. And when we understand them, we inch closer to forgiving them, or worse, becoming them. So ask yourself this: if you were hurt the way they were, would you really make different choices? That question is not designed to excuse cruelty, but it forces you to look deeper, not at the act, but at the why behind it. Because maybe the reason we love villains is the same reason we fear them. They remind us that the line between good and evil is not out there, it is inside. And sometimes the more human a villain becomes, the harder it is to pretend we are different. If villains are made, not born, then is there a way back? This is the most uncomfortable and perhaps most human question in all of dark psychology. Can someone who has done terrible things truly change? Can a mind twisted by power, ego, or trauma be untangled by truth? The path of redemption is not for the innocent, it is for the broken, and for those brave enough to face what they broke. But it is rare, because redemption demands the one thing most villains lack: honest remorse. Remorse is not guilt. Guilt is what you feel when someone sees you. Remorse is what you feel when no one is watching. It is quiet, humbling. It begins where ego ends. In clinical psychology, especially in therapy with individuals diagnosed with personality disorders like narcissism or antisocial traits, therapists often find one consistent barrier to healing: the refusal to accept responsibility. Not because these individuals are unaware of their actions, but because acknowledging them means shattering the story they have built to survive. And for many villains, that story is all they have. But every so often, we see it: the crack, the moment of stillness in a courtroom, a confession from a prisoner, a sigh from a villain at the edge of their own downfall. In that moment, something raw slips through. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once said, "The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have. That is regret. Not the fear of punishment, but the grief of who you could have been and are not." And when that happens, we do not just see the villain, we see the human underneath. So here is the paradox. If someone becomes self-aware too late, does it redeem them or damn them deeper? Think about the stories where villains seek redemption. Darth Vader removing the mask, Severus Snape revealing the truth, Zuko choosing a new path. These arcs work not because they erase what was done, but because they show something else: empathy regained. Empathy is the foundation of morality. Without it, we dehumanize others. With it, we see ourselves in them. That shift, when genuine, is the beginning of change. But it is not easy, and it is never quick. For someone who has lived in darkness, light feels violent. Self-awareness is brutal. Therapy, for those brave enough to enter it, becomes a battlefield of memory, shame, and resistance. Yet some do it. They write letters of apology they never send. They isolate themselves not to hide, but to reflect. They sit in silence and actually listen to the echoes of what they've done. And in those rare cases, something changes. Not dramatically, not always visibly, but a seed is planted. Because human nature, as much as it creates evil, also craves healing. So ask yourself this: if someone you once feared showed real sorrow, would you believe them? Redemption is not about wiping the slate clean. It is about acknowledging the stain and still choosing to keep walking. Not every villain can be saved. Many do not want to be, but the psychology of villains reminds us of this truth. The line between good and evil is not just thin, it moves. It bends under pressure, under pain, under love, and sometimes it bends back. And if it can bend for them, maybe in the end, it can bend for us too. So, after everything, where does that leave us? We have looked into the childhood of villains, unmasked their charm, exposed their thirst for control, and traced the lies they tell themselves to justify their cruelty. We have seen the followers who let them rise, the stories that make them seductive, and the rare moments when regret breaks through the mask. But now all that reflection turns inward. Because if dark psychology teaches us anything, it is this: villains are not a different species, they are a different possibility. Human nature is not one thing, it is many: compassion and cruelty, love and domination, empathy and emptiness. These opposites do not live in separate people, they live in us, together, in tension, every day. The psychologist Carl Jung warned of this in his teachings on the shadow self, the unconscious part of us that holds everything we do not want to see: our envy, our rage, our selfish desires. We push it down, pretend it is not there, but it waits. And the longer we ignore it, the louder it gets. That is why villains matter, not just in cinema or history, but in your life. Because every time you feel overlooked, humiliated, powerless, the shadow stirs. Every time you want revenge more than peace, dominance more than dialogue, the villain whispers, You may not act on it, but you feel it, and that is enough. So here is the final paradox. If the capacity for evil lives in all of us, is being good just a choice or a daily fight? It is a question that philosophers have asked for centuries. Some say evil is a flaw in character. Others say it is the absence of empathy. Some say it is rational, even logical. Others say it is simply giving in when we should have stood firm. But in the end, the villain is not just out there in the world. They are in here, in the mirror. And the scariest part is not what they've done, but how close they sometimes feel to who we are. You might never manipulate. You might never hurt, or betray, or break someone's spirit. But the impulse, the instinct, that flicker of "I could if I wanted to," that is real. And it must be faced. Because facing it is the only way we grow stronger than it. Deny the villain in you, and it controls you from the shadows. Confront it, and you can choose something better. Empathy, accountability, healing, these are not weak responses. They are the most powerful resistance to the darkness within. So before we close, ask yourself, not about the villains on screen or the monsters in headlines, but the one you've met in your own life, the one that maybe, just maybe, you have flirted with becoming. What stopped you? And will it stop you the next time? Because in the end, the question is not whether villains exist. It is whether we are paying enough attention to keep them from becoming us.